Hello, peace be with you. The notion that I want to tackle in this podcast today is the notion of mysticism and, in the Islamic tradition, Sufism. I think it's important as an introduction to get a deep knowledge or understanding of what this notion means from within the spiritual traditions, the Jewish, the Christian, and the Muslim traditions, and to get an understanding of what we have to understand out of this notion, and to get a better understanding of the different steps and different levels, because this is a notion which has multiple meanings, and it's important to get an overall understanding of this. And then we can talk about the objectives and the means and the obstacles and also the conditions. So the four pillars that I want to tackle in this podcast today are important. Let me start with an understanding of what do we mean when we speak about mysticism. Mainly it's a Greek notion, and there are three notions that we have within it that are important. The first has to do with mystery, that it's the link that we find between us as human being and the mystery and the mysterious dimension of our knowledge. So it's the connection between us and the unknown that is important here. This is the first notion. It has to do with how do we get the knowledge of what is behind the veil. It's what is mysterious in our life and in our understanding of the world around us. So it's to go beyond what is apparent and what is visible, to get the invisible, to get the what is hidden behind the visible dimension of light. The second notion that we find in mysticism and in the Greek etymology has to do with teaching. It has to do with knowing. It has to do with a learning process. So it's how do we get this knowledge? How do we try to learn about this dimension as human being? And in which way we have to deal with these teachings and this knowledge, which is not the superficial knowledge that we can find through rationality. It's to go beyond rationality. Even we can say it's to go towards this knowledge that is part of the knowledge coming from our heart. It's the knowledge of the invisible that we can reach through our heart beyond our rationality. So it's not the knowledge of the order in an objective way, it's the knowledge of the essence, of the very essence of life and things. And this essence we can reach, we can get, we can find through a process where we are training our heart and getting a knowledge which has to do with something which is veiled in our daily life. So this is the second dimension. The third here, it's also to get a sense that when we go towards this knowledge, when we try to get the essence, the what is veiled, what is beyond the visible, we have two things. As I said, first is mystery, is the mysterious side of our life. It has to do with teaching, but it also has to do with God. It has to do with how do we get this knowledge of the transcendent, of the divine. And what is said in the mystical traditions is you can get the knowledge of God through the knowledge of the self. So in order to come close to God, you have first to come close to yourself. It's to go beyond your superficial consciousness to get this deep conscience of who you are. In other words, what we have here is, yes, of course, I know, I think, and you know the Descartes way of putting it, I think, so I am. This I think is the superficial understanding of me being here through my rationality. But the mystical question is not only I am, who is the I that is there? Who am I who can say I am? So, in other words, what we need to get here is this deep understanding of what it means to be and what it means to get a sense of this self that is deeper and far deeper in us than this superficial consciousness that we have here when we come to this understanding. To the point that the very question that I have when I'm talking in mystical terms, in the way I have to deal with mysticism, is what do I really want? What myself is here for, and how am I going to achieve this very understanding of my essence and my the very essence of my life and who I am in this life. So we go beyond this superficial consciousness and we try to get a sense of what is veiled for our consciousness and what is beyond the visible. And in order to come close to God, to understand that I have to come first close to myself. I have to deepen the knowledge of the self in order to come closer to the knowledge of the divine. This is something which it's essential in all the mystical traditions and in the Islamic traditions, of course, in what we call Sufism. And you know that in Sufism there are different understanding even about the very meaning of Sufism, where some were talking about, it comes from Sufa, is the way they were dressed in a very poor way because they were avoiding the world, refusing to be part of the world, and dressed in very, very modest way in order to put the essential. The essential was the knowledge of God beyond anything which is richness and power in this world. So to be powerless in this world in order to come close to God's power in this life during this quest for this proximity. Part of the way people were saying, Sufism is coming from different, I think that we had 7 to 8 different origins for the way Sufism is understood and in the way we are dealing with this notion. Having said that, the essence of everything here is very much about, try to learn about yourself, try to learn about who you are, the deep essence of your being, and through this process of trying to get this knowledge, you go through the unveiled process, which is the el-kashf, which is I'm trying to unveil the very truth, the light behind the light beyond the light that I can see with my rationality. And reason is perceived as light, but the light that you find in your heart, the light that you are going towards when it comes to come close to the light, which is one of the names of God, is light upon light. Then I'm trying to get this understanding with my heart, through my heart, to come close to God. So this knowledge that we get out of this process is part of what it's all about when it comes to mysticism, when it comes to Sufism. So having said that, and you see it's a long introduction with multiple dimensions that we have to get here, there is something that we have to solve. The first pillar of this is the objectives. What do we want to achieve by doing this? And here what we need to get is the ultimate objective of this process, the learning process, to go towards the invisible, our soul, the hidden dimension of this knowledge is to come close to God and to come close to Tawheed, the oneness of God in the Islamic tradition, but also the presence of God in the Christian and the Jewish tradition, which is part of, to come close to this, I need to get this understanding of the self. And this is going to be done through different steps and levels and states. And we have this in the Islamic tradition. Al-Mawaqif is the different stations that we have to go through. Maratib is the different levels, and Al-Ahwal, the different states that you have to go through. And you need to get a sense of this step-by-step process. So in order to follow the way, this initiation, this getting the mysterious knowledge, getting the esoteric knowledge, the knowledge of the inside, which is known also as gnosis. The gnosis is the knowledge of God, the knowledge of the self, the knowledge of what is invisible for our rationality, the spiritual knowledge that we get out of this process is, and we need to go through steps. And it's a step-by-step process, and for this, it's the only way for us to deepen our knowledge. Having said that, we also, with this knowledge, need to get, step by step, and it takes time to be initiated to this. It's that we are acquiring knowledge, and with this knowledge, we are adding knowledge to knowledge. So how are we going to do this? And there are many different ways that the scholars and the Sufi and the mystics were talking about is coming back to the self. It's to go through patience and to nurture patience in ourselves. It's also mastering ourselves. Al-muraqaba, it's also something which is this self-consciousness, that it's very important about, okay, who am I? I'm trying to do with my life. It's adding knowledge to knowledge, and this process of coming back to the self, getting more knowledge out of our patient way of dealing with ourselves, looking at who we are, going through this self-consciousness, going through this way of dealing with who am I, what am I doing. It's something which is part of everything. And then part of this, the ultimate objective, and within which we have objectives, which is trying to get at different levels just to progress in the process, to get more knowledge and to add and to go from one state to another state, from one station to another station, from one level to another level, which is also always going higher. At the same time, we have to acknowledge the fact that sometimes we can just regress. We can just, we are moving forward, but sometimes we are moving back. And we need to get this right in our way of dealing with this process, that even sometimes the only fact that we are regressing, that we are moving back, it's in itself part of our progression, part of our process of getting more knowledge. So the fact, remember what Mandela was saying, and this is something which is part of a Sufi tradition as well, or a mystical tradition as well, is in this life, I never lose. Either I win or I learn. That's exactly it. You win, meaning that you are getting knowledge. And when you are having this feeling that, oh, I'm regressing, I'm coming back to, oh, it's worse than what it was before, I'm regressing. And this is, you learn. And through this process, you get something which is essential as part of this teaching and this knowledge that we are acquiring. It's the very essence of humility. Because when you regress, when you fall, when you just move back to something which is, it's as if I'm not progressing, this very feeling, this very deep reality of you facing obstacles and sometimes not knowing where you are, it's teaching you humility. And humility, it's part of the whole process as an objective. You cannot come close to God and to yourself if you don't get this deep understanding, this deep feeling, this deep experience of humility in the way you deal with your own knowledge. So it's not up to you, knowing that when you understand that you cannot do it yourself, that you need God in order to come close to God. This is the very essence of this initiation that we are talking about in the mystical tradition. Now, having said this about the objectives, let us come to the second pillar, and the second pillar has to do with the means. And when we deal with the means, it's important here to get them all together. So here we have 7 means, and you see 7 means, 5 obstacles, and 7 conditions. These are all symbolic numbers that we have to remember, that we can find with the work of in the work of some scholars and Sufi that are well known from the Rumi tradition, but also Junaid, also Ibn Ata al-Iskandari, and others that are part of this. And of course, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali was talking about this. The first means that we have is study. To study. It has to do with a learning process to get to the substance. As I was saying, is not only to get the knowledge of what is visible to our rationality, is to get the knowledge of what is invisible with our heart, with the light of our heart, meaning that here we have to come back to the knowledge of the self. It's to take time, it's to care about yourself, it's to take care of yourself in the way you look at yourself, and to take time to get a deep knowledge. But to go through this study of the self, to go to this knowledge of the self, there is something which is essential here, which is in opposition with the consumer society that we are living in. In this consumer society, you are told, do whatever you want and just go and follow your passions and your desires, and this is freedom. Here it's exactly the opposite. Is you have to be disciplined with yourself, disciplined in the rituals that you are following. So this is why the mystical traditions are very much connected to religiosity, with religions, with all the rituals. It's because religions are helping you to be disciplined that you are going to get this way of dealing with this process, this initiation, to get a deeper understanding of yourself and of the world, and then trying to reach and to come close to God. So this is something which is part of this process. The second means is a dhikr, is remembrance. And this is so essential because we are human beings just very quick to forget. The repetition and to try to remember the essence of life and the essence of our presence is something which is important. Remember that Abu Hamid al-Ghazali was saying, in order just to change your own nature, you have to repeat. So the fact that you repeat the name of God, the fact that you repeat supplications, the fact that you repeat prayers, it's helping your mind to change your nature, the very nature of human being. And if you look at what is said today in neurosciences, it's something which is very, very interesting. In fact, the way our brain is functioning is by the fact that you are repeating, by the fact that you are getting something that you repeat in your life. It's you give to your brain, you give to yourself a second nature. You take something which is helping you to reach a level of changing, transforming the self, transforming your very nature. So when you work on your brain by repeating, you work on yourself by deepening this knowledge, deepening this way of dealing with the invisible. You change in a way your very nature by repeating. So repetition could appear rationally as something which is not deep, but spiritually repetition means deepening the very connection that you have with the invisible, with yourself and with God. The third means that you have is contemplation, and this is also has to do with meditation, that you meditate, you contemplate the world around you, the creation, the beauty. Contemplation of the beauty around you is helping you to get to the beauty within yourself. Beauty is essential, aesthetics is essential to the mystical tradition, and the contemplation of what is there, it's something which is so important. Having said that, with contemplation there is a state which is strange. Sometimes we don't get that, but it's an essential teaching in the mystical tradition, is acceptation, is the fact that you accept what is the natural order. To the point that in the Jewish tradition, at the very beginning, there was a sense that when you want what is around you, when you will merge with the will of God in the way He created the world, this is where you get true freedom. That's very important. When we think that my freedom is to do what I want, the mystical tradition is saying go beyond what you want and try to mirror the very order of the world, to the point that your will is mirroring God's will. And when this happens, when this is possible, this is what you get true freedom, because you free yourself from the superficial will of your ego to come to the essential will of the self, of what is the light. I would say the light in yourself mirroring the light around you. So acceptation is the fact that you accept, that the fact that you surrender to what is around you and the order that is around. Not to the point that you accept the unjust. No, you surrender to beauty, you surrender to order, you surrender to His will. But His will is telling you, if you are facing injustice, you have to stand up. It's not to surrender to injustice, it's to surrender to His justice in order to resist human injustices if you are facing it. The third means here has to do with generosity. It's also to give from who you are and what you have. This generosity is part of means through which you get the knowledge of the self, because this is where you can see the limits of what you are able to give and what you can give and you cannot give, that you are not willing to give. It's part of this ongoing process where you deal with yourself and you go beyond who you are by giving from who you are and what you have. The sixth one is solidarity. And solidarity is not only solidarity towards your fellow human beings, it's solidarity with the world, it's solidarity with the creation, it's solidarity with life around you. And it's life, that nature is a living presence, it's life in itself, the species around you, and human beings, of course. But this kind of solidarity with life, in the name of the one who created life, it's essential as part of this process. And the last one has to do with sacrifice. Are you able to get out of your comfort zone to just to sacrifice from what you have and who you are in order to be a witness of what you believe in? This sense has to do also with courage. Courage is essential here, because at one point, in the name of God, in the name of your love to God, towards God, and the love that you have for His creation, you are ready to stand up and to understand that your ego is not the most important thing in the world, that your presence is not essential if your presence is accepting injustices, is accepting the non-acceptable. So it means that there is a problem with your presence. So to be able to be part of this harmonious creation, you also need to get a sense of, okay, I should be able to experience sacrifice and to give more from who I am in order to be better myself. Now, these are essential means that you have to deal with. And of course, we are dealing with obstacles. And I would just mention here quite quickly 5 main obstacles that are on our way when we are following this initiation we need to deal with. The first one, of course, is the ego. It's arrogance, is when the I is taking so much space in the way you look at the world that we end up being arrogant. The second has to do with passions and desires and even hatred. And you know that in the Quran, وَلَا يَجْرِمَنَّكُمْ شَنَآنُ قَوْمٍ عَلَىٰ أَلَّا تَعْدِلُوا. Don't let this hatred towards people, even you can be at war with people, but don't let the hatred of what they are doing push you to be unjust. So you need to master your patience, you need to master your desire in order to be just and to be disciplined, so to speak, as we said before. So this is part of the obstacles. So of course, power and this love for power is something which could be an obstacle, because the opposite of surrender to God, you are just trying to get some power in this world, and power corrupts, as you know. Always, if you are not disciplined with yourself, the ego is going to take over. And money also, it's important, because money, it's all about having, it's all about what we have, and this could interfere, this could taint, this could destroy the very essence of this way of getting the knowledge of the self. So you are so much loving what you have that you end up not knowing who you are. That's also part of the obstacles. And among the obstacles, there is something which is important, is the people around you, the companions that you have, the friends that you have. Tell me who you love, and I will tell you who you are. Tell me about your friends, I will tell you who you are. Friendship, it's important here. So you need to get this companionship, the people around us, helping us to come to the self, and not to remain at the surface, at the periphery of who we are. So that's also something which is essential obstacles in our way towards this knowledge of the self and the knowledge of God. Let me end with the conditions here that are necessary in this process, that we find in all the mystical traditions, the Jewish, the Christian, and the Islamic traditions, in the Sufi tradition, but also, I would say, in the Buddhist tradition, when it comes to how do we deal with ourselves. So there is here something which is essential, and especially in the monotheistic tradition, is faith. So faith, it's essential, because this faith that you have in God, and the trust that you have in Him, helping you to go through this process, understanding that during this process you need Him to come close to Him, and if you are let alone, you are going to be lost in the whole process. So faith is important, with trusting Him. It's tawakkul ala Allah, it's essential. The second, as I said, it's discipline, that you cannot just say, oh, I trust Him and that's it. We have to be disciplined in the way you deal with Him, in the way you pray, in the way you remember, in the way you deal with day and night, in the way you deal with time, in the way you deal with space. Discipline is essential, and it's a way, paradoxically, it's a way to get freedom. In fact, if you think that it's without discipline that you get freedom, you don't get it. Discipline is the only human way to reach true and deep freedom, in the way you are with yourself and in the way you are with the world. So, having said this, we have to this as one of the conditions is repetition, because part of the discipline is to repeat and to repeat and to repeat, in order to transform yourself, to change your nature, which is a nature that could forget quickly, to a nature that is now accustomed, now trained to remember in a way which is a second nature. The third So the first one is faith, the second is discipline, the third is repetition, the fourth is patience. And as I said, those people, they like everything which is going very fast. But in this process of the knowledge of the self, you have to be patient. You have to rely on Him. You have to rely on your own work. You need to go through steps. You cannot go too fast. You have to go through steps that are determined, and they are sometimes very long, and sometimes you will go back, you will move back, you will fall, and you need to get this as part of this patience, a sabr, which is part of the process, getting what? The fifth condition, which is humility. You have to be humble and to rely on Him, and to remember that you're asking God to help you to go through the process, to be patient enough to repeat what should be repeated, to be disciplined with your own self, and to deepen your faith. So humility is essential. With humility, courage, it's also important. And once again, if you are trying to come back to yourself, to get rid of what is superficial in your life, you also have to face in the world injustices, despotism, lies, and corrupt people. You need to be quite clear that as much as you refuse to be part of a world where superficiality and injustice and lack of solidarity is the rule, you need to come with a presence in the world which is remembering, reminding, I would say, the people of what is right. And it takes courage with your own self, courage with when you deal with your ego. You should be ready to lose what you have in order to respect who you are. You should be ready to lose what you have in order to keep this respect and the self-respect of who you are. So courage is important. And the last one, which is part of the whole thing, which is the envelope of everything, which is the essence of everything, which is the light of everything, is love. Al-Hubb wal-Mahabba. It's to this through this process of getting this knowledge. Al-Irfan, al-Ma'rifatullah. It's the knowledge of God. It's based on what? What is the secret of Al-Irfan? What is the secret of Al-Ma'rifa, Ma'rifatullah? It's to love Him in order to be loved by Him, and knowing that when He loves you, it irradiates around you. So the secret of the whole process in the mystical tradition is loving God and hoping and trying to be loved by Him, and hoping that this process, this discipline, is going to come close to His love in order to spread around love. This is what we have to do at the end of the day. Our presence everywhere should be in the name of His love, to be an agent of love in the world, loving His creation, loving the human beings, loving what is good, promoting what is good, and in the name of this love, to hate what is bad, to detest what is bad, and to resist what is bad. This is part of the whole process, which is what we are trying to reach when we are involved in this tradition, this way of coming close to God by getting a better knowledge of ourselves. May Allah help us to follow this path, and remember, don't forget to tell the people you love that you love them. Life is fragile, and peace be with you. And I would say here that with this peace, it's important to remember the 7 conditions that are important for us to try to be dignified and to be courageous enough to come close to Him and to get His love and to spread love around us. Peace be with you.